Thank you, Nick, for that very kind introduction. And thank you to the Canadian Club for inviting me to speak from this very storied podium. And thank you to BMO Financial Group for sponsoring the luncheon today. But most of all, I want to thank all of you for coming. The size of this crowd really speaks to the issues facing our city today. And we're going to look at those issues today through the lens of Toronto's Vital Signs 2010. Now, as many of you may know, the report is filled with trends and statistics. It's been described as an annual checkup on the quality of life in this city. But it also tells a story about Toronto at a turning point. I'm going to tell you that story today because all of us have a stake in how it turns out. I'll let you in a little bit on the ending. You can't row a boat in two directions at once. It's time we start pulling together. And the stars have never been so aligned to do just that. I'm going to talk about some of Toronto's extraordinary strengths, and we have many of them. I'm going to speak about the challenges, and frankly, they are growing. Then I want to get into some of the solutions, not just about our actions, but quite frankly, about our attitudes. But first, let's start with what is Vital Signs and why do we even bother to do it? As I said, it's a comprehensive report that we develop over one full year. We do it in partnership with many well-known organizations. Many of you are here today. We do it with our lead research partner, which is George Brown College. The report looks at 11 independent, important, but highly connected factors of life in Toronto. It's a snapshot of our city, brings it all into focus. We look at the safety of our citizens. We'll look at the environment. We look at transit. We look at the gap between rich and poor, and much, much more. But it's more than just any report. It's the compass that guides our work at the Toronto Community Foundation. Now, our foundation, as you heard, is focused on making the city as good as it can be, the best it can be. And we do it by connecting philanthropy with community needs and opportunities, bringing those two together. We identify needs in the city through the Vital Signs report. Then we identify, and with our fund holders and many partners, we fund the solutions to the needs identified in Vital Signs. Identify the issues, support the solutions. We call that the art of wise giving. Now, Vital Signs also guides us in a lot of our city building initiatives. We do this with a host of our partners, and you may know about some of them. The Toronto Sports Leadership Program for youth in high priority neighborhoods. Or if you've been to the museum subway station recently, that's our Arts on Track, the transformation of public spaces. Currently, we're working with the Pan Am Games on developing their social capital programs. And I'm pleased to let you know that with the support of IBM, we just launched our online Community Knowledge Center. It's a web portal that highlights nonprofit organizations that are providing the very solutions to the issues raised in this report. It's been called the YouTube for Philanthropy in Toronto, and it's one of a kind. Now, earlier, you heard me refer to this as a snapshot. Now, why is that important? Because in Toronto, as diverse as we are, we have as many perspectives on Toronto as there are people in it. Where you live and how you get to work often provides you the lens on how you know Toronto. So if it's North Toronto, down to Bay Street along Mount Pleasant, very different than Scarborough to Yonge and Sheppard via public transit. So we all see very different Torontos. Let me share a very personal example with you. I am blessed to live in a neighborhood known as the Beach, right by Ashbridges Bay. And I'm known to go for a run down on the boardwalk sometime. And when I get there, what do I see? I see iPods, Starbucks, golden retrievers. It's like running through a Freedom 55 commercial. But you come back a little bit later in the day, and what do you get? Spicy barbecues. You get languages and clothes from all corners of the world. It's more like the set of the film Bollywood Hollywood. The important part is, though, these are two very different Torontos sharing the same space, but they're very far apart. Vital signs brings these different Torontos together and gets us all on the same page, exactly where we need to be. So as we look at this year's report, there are two key themes that I'd like you to keep in mind. Firstly, we live in a great city. We've got a lot to be proud of. Secondly, Toronto is facing challenges that have brought other cities to their knees. So, what does Vital Signs 2010 tell us about Toronto? Let's begin. Let's begin with did you know? Did you know you live in a city of 2.65 million people and a region of 5.5 million people? Long a city of immigrants, we're now home to people from 200 ethnic origins and over 140 languages and dialects. By comparison, there are 192 member states in the United Nations, so we are diverse. Almost half the city's residents are foreign-born. That's the second highest percentage in the entire world. Number one, Dubai. So what has this great massive diversity done with the City of Toronto? Well, in 2010, PricewaterhouseCoopers selected Toronto as one of 21 leading finance, cultural, and business centers in the world, and number one in the world in livability. Toronto dropped one spot on the Mercer Quality of Living Survey down to number 17 amongst 221 global cities. How about the top U.S. city? Came in at number 31, a place we wouldn't mind visiting, Honolulu. How about innovation? Number of patents filed is considered a very good and reliable measure of innovation. In Toronto, for the third year in a row, we're 17th in the world at 843 patents filed. That's great news. It's only half of what they did in Washington, D.C., only a third of what they accomplished in Chicago, and that ranks far behind number one, Tokyo, with 20,605 patents. So we've got some work to do. But Toronto is productive, and it is prosperous, with GDP growing from $86 billion in 1981 to over $121 billion in 2009. We make up about 25% of the province's GDP and about 10% of the nation's GDP. The U.S. comparator, New York City, Chicago, Boston, San Francisco, combined make up 10% of the U.S. GDP. So make no mistake about it, Toronto is the most significant driver of the provincial and national economies. So that's Toronto from the outside looking in. Let's delve a little bit deeper into some of our vital signs. And first, let's start with the environment. After years of being known as the big smoke, we're actually getting greener. There were 4 smog alert days in 2009. That's down from 13 in 2008, 29 in 2007, and we're well below the 10-year average of 17.7. How about our beaches? More of our beaches are meeting the strict water quality standard of blue flag designation. In 2009, 7 of our 11 beaches were blue flag. That's up from 4 in 2005. So I touched on beaches. Well, how about islands? And by that I mean the phenomenon of urban heat islands in Toronto. Heat islands. These are areas of higher temperature in the city, and they create a vicious cycle of adverse effects. You get your heat, get the air conditioning, the more energy to support the air conditioning, the emissions from the air conditioning energy, and once again, more heat. And they're growing by 3% annually in Toronto. Well, if that's news to you, it'll also be news to you that in 2009, Toronto became the first city in North America to pass a bylaw requiring green roof construction on new industrial development, precisely to curb the heat island expansion. So let's move from the environment, turn the page, and move over to everybody's favorite, transit. Let's look at getting around this vast city. The reality is we're still the longest commuting time in Toronto. But one obvious solution is our public transit. The TTC is the third largest rapid transit system in North America, right after New York City and Mexico City. In 2009, the TTC reported record ridership, over 471 million riders. That's over 1.5 million passengers each business day. But the overcrowded system, well, it's got to increase its capacity to handle another 175 million riders annually by 2021. So we've got a long way to go. The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, known as OECD, they recently cited Toronto's transportation woes as the key threat to our region's future prosperity. You may be interested to know, though, that Canada is currently the only one of the 31 OECD nations without a long-term federal investment transit plan. We all remember the adage, you fail to plan, you plan to fail. An area of great pride for Toronto, and another chapter in the story chronicled in Vital Signs, it's arts and culture. Now, this is considered a key indicator of prosperity for a city, and we're doing rather well. In 2009, over 15.5 million people attended city-funded or programmed events. That's an increase of 20% over the previous year. And you only need to think about the turnout at Nuit Blanche on the weekend to get a good sense of what this city's capable of. So, we take our art very seriously in Toronto, perhaps not so much our artists, and I'll tell you why. We have the highest number of artists in the country at 22,300. That's one-sixth of all the artists in Canada. But the median earning of these artists was about 36% less than the median for all Toronto workers. That's very low considering half of these artists actually have a bachelor's degree or higher. How about the Bohemian Index? Well, Toronto scores 4th on the Bohemian Index in North America. What is the Bohemian Index? It's a measure of professional, artistically creative people in a region. And this is a strong indicator of a driver of the economy. I'll give you an example. Film and television production in Toronto generated over $877 million in 2009 alone. Good news is that's up 43% from the year before, and especially good because it included a doubling in U.S. activity back into Toronto. Now let's have a look at one of the more important aspects of our city and one that's most headlined, and that's safety. Despite the intense media spotlight on crime, police-reported crime continues an almost decade-long decline. Total criminal offenses in the city dropped for the 3rd year in a row. The number of reported violent crimes in the city is also at its lowest in more than a decade. There are fewer property crimes in the city, a 2.8% decrease from the year before. And hate crimes, hard to say, but a bad news, good news story. Bad news increased by almost 14% to 174 cases last year. That's compared to 153 the year before, but well below the 17-year average of 201. Good news, bad news story. So as you can see, there's lots to be proud of. We're a great city with the potential to be even greater. That's the good news, but that's only a part of the story.